In 2003, a five-member Hindu family in London disappeared without a trace. At first, the police thought they had returned to India, but the truth was much darker than that. Initially, Kenneth Reagan, the main perpetrator in the case, almost managed to fool the police. But this ruthless criminal had committed a crime so unique and horrifying that no one could believe it was real. Today, we're going to delve into a story that shows how greed can lead to a major disaster. Anil Chauhan was a successful Indian businessman in London, owner of the freight and fruit import company Seba Freight, valued at £5 million. He lived with his wife Nancy, their two young sons, and his mother-in-law in an area called Hounslow in London. This family rebuilt their lives in England with big dreams. Anil Chauhan was a tough and intelligent man who had built his company from scratch. He was considered a family man with a pleasant demeanor. To his employees, he was a calm, considerate, and friendly boss. His employees said that at Anil's company, everyone worked together. When there was a lot of work, he would buy pizza, bring drinks, and they truly felt like one big happy family. But owning a transport company made Anil Chauhan a target, and in the shadows, a dangerous man was waiting for his chance. Someone who knew no boundaries in his pursuit of money and power and was willing to do anything. This man's name was Kenneth Reagan. Reagan was a criminal who had just been released from prison in January 2003, and right then, he came to Seba Freight Company looking for a job. Since Anil Chauhan himself had spent some time in prison before for tax evasion, he felt sympathy for someone who said they wanted to turn their life around. In fact, Anil was a very fair person. He didn't just give people a second chance, but gave them opportunities again and again. His mindset was that since he himself got a second chance in life, why not help others rebuild their lives too? That's how Kenneth Reagan got hired as a driver at Anil Chauhan's company. On the surface, Kenneth seemed like a good driver who did his job well, but deep down, he was a complicated person. Kenneth Reagan's past was very dark. Before going to prison, Reagan was a successful drug trafficker, and his friends had nicknamed him Captain Cash. That means a boss who has a lot of cash, or someone who's really skilled at making money, though through illegal ways. In fact, during the 1980s and 1990s, Reagan falsely presented himself as a former undercover police officer or intelligence agent, always claiming that he had carried out secret missions for the government and was still in contact with them. He even claimed that he had a lot of money and made loads of cash both through illegal activities and legitimate businesses. Because of this, since he always dealt in cash, dressed sharply, and claimed to have been a high-level government agent, his friends jokingly nicknamed him Captain Cash. But by the late 1990s, Reagan had become a full-fledged professional criminal. He had set up several trucking companies for himself in the Heathrow area, which is one of London's business districts, and used them as a front to smuggle drugs into the country. Reagan knew almost all the major criminals and crime families in London, lived a truly luxurious and high-end lifestyle, and it was during this period that he met Belinda Brown. Belinda was a well-known agent for celebrities and prominent social figures. In her opinion, Kenneth was a rough guy without any particular education, but at the same time, he was friendly. He dressed stylishly, wore expensive watches, and spent a lot of money. Belinda said that Kenneth always carried a lot of cash with him, and it was always in large bills. He carried a Samsonite briefcase full of money, thinking he could buy himself class and social status with it, but he was just an empty drum. In a way, he was like one of those newly rich boys. In any case, Belinda was unintentionally drawn into Reagan's world full of crime and deception. Everything started when Kenneth became interested in Belinda. He called her a lot, sent her emails, and told Belinda that he had never felt this way about anyone before. This made Belinda a bit thoughtful, especially when one of her friends told her that Kenneth had said she was his girlfriend. Belinda got worried. But just a few days later, on June 17, 1998, Kenneth Reagan was arrested with 25 kilograms of heroin. Kenneth was probably facing 80 years in prison, but right from the start, Kenneth decided to become a police informant and turn in major criminals. Reagan's testimony led to the conviction of 12 major criminals, while his own sentence was reduced and he was released from prison 4 years later. But Kenneth no longer had any money or friends. All his assets were seized by court order, and he had lost his friends because he had become a police informant. No one trusted him anymore. When Reagan was released from prison, he was living in a very small house, actually just a single room, with his father. Kenneth definitely wanted to get back into the drug trafficking world and reclaim his previous luxurious lifestyle. And to achieve that goal, Anil Chauhan's shipping company was the perfect cover for his drug operations. Everything started with a trap. Very soon after Kenneth started working at the freight company, he told Chauhan that he knew some investors who wanted to buy the company for £3 million. It was a tempting amount. On the other hand, Anil Chauhan's wife, Nancy, insisted that Anil retire and that they return to India. Nevertheless, Anil said he needed to think about the offer. But while Chauhan was considering his offer, Kenneth Reagan moved on to the next phase of his plan and went after Brenda Brown. During the 4 years that Reagan was in prison, Kenneth's romantic calls and emails to Belinda had stopped. But now that he was free, he started keeping an eye on Belinda again. Belinda had sold her old house in Chelsea and moved to Devon in the southwest of England, which is famous for its unspoiled nature, beautiful coastline, and traditional villages, to start a new life. Kenneth finds Belinda, calls her, and offers her a job. He said that he was about to become the owner of a company and was looking for a new CEO, and he couldn't think of anyone better than Belinda. To tempt Belinda into accepting, Reagan offered her a high salary, £72,000, and that's just for 2 days a week. Belinda, who at the time wasn't in a great financial situation, she'd taken out a big loan to buy a house, had 2 school-aged kids in private school, had quit her job and her boyfriend had left her, accepted the offer. But this job offer became an excuse for Reagan to come and go from Belinda's remote house in Down. It seemed like Reagan had developed a strange obsession with the land around Belinda's farm and was thoroughly inspecting it. Belinda said that Kent was always complaining about the mud. He would say, "I can make this place really beautiful for you. The only thing this place needs is a drainage ditch." But, well, this was an old farm, not a luxury villa. Meanwhile, Anil Chauhan had made up his mind by February. It was decided that he would have a meeting with those investors Reagan had introduced, who claimed they wanted to buy the company. On Thursday morning, right before Valentine's Day, Anil left his office and told his employees that he had a meeting. He said, "I'm going to close a deal and sell the company. I'll let you know." But that was the last time Anil Chauhan was seen. On Monday morning, the company's employees were faced with a strange situation. Everyone gathered, and Belinda said she had been introduced by Kent as the new owner of the company. Everyone was in shock. They were all wondering what had happened to Anil, where he had gone. Had he really sold the company? So what would happen to the employees? To dispel the doubts, Reagan showed a letter that was signed at the bottom by Anil Chauhan. The letter stated that Chauhan had sold the company and, due to Nancy's illness, they had both left the country and wanted to retire. Apparently, after seeing this letter, everyone accepted the story. They lowered their heads and got back to work. Everyone knew that Kent had only been the company driver. But since Kent seemed so assertive and in control at the time, no one said anything and everyone believed him. Besides, the company was really busy and no one had the time to object or investigate. So, Brenda sat behind a desk and started checking the accounts on the computer at Reagan's request. On the second day, Brenda felt unwell on the way, so instead of going to the company, she went back home in Dawn. But she was met with a strange scene. She saw an old, beat-up Jaguar parked in her yard and two men working on her property with an excavator. These two men were William Hornsey and Peter Rees, friends of Kent Reagan. Belinda angrily asked the men, "What are you doing?" And one of them said, "We're making a drainage ditch for you." When Reagan arrived, Belinda angrily told him, "The issue isn't whether I need a drainage ditch. The issue is you dug a drainage ditch on my land without permission. You never asked me, even though this land belongs to me. You can't go dig up someone else's land like that." But Reagan calmly replied, "Well, I thought you'd be happy about it." This incident, bitter as it was, passed. In late 2003, Kent Reagan was on the verge of returning to his millionaire lifestyle, and the front company became the perfect cover for his drug trafficking activities. He even had Belinda Brown, whom he had admired from afar for a long time, and Belinda had become one of the employees. It was as if all the dreams Reagan had, one by one, were coming true, but the secret hidden behind these successes was on the verge of being revealed. But miles away, Anil Chauhan's brother-in-law, Ankur Varma, a journalist in New Zealand, was planning to come to London after 9 years to visit his sister Nancy. Ankur talked to his mother, who lived with the Chauhan family, on the phone daily, but after February 15th, the calls stopped. Neither Nancy nor their mother was answering. That's why Ankur became worried about his family and contacted the Metropolitan Police, which is the London police. The police's initial investigation only concluded that the Chauhan family had returned to their home country, India, and all of the Chauhan family's friends, acquaintances, colleagues, and neighbors in London believed the same. But deep down, Ankur felt that something bad had happened. That's why he decided to come to Britain himself and personally look for his family. After Ankur opened his sister's house, he was shocked by what he saw. The children's toys were still scattered on the floor. The baby bottles, the formula, the clothes, everything was still in the house. There was even food in the fridge. But what turned Ankur's suspicion into certainty was seeing that his mother's most valuable possession, a prayer book she always carried with her, was still in the house. With this evidence, which suggested his family had been forced out of the house, Ankur went back to the police and convinced them to reopen the investigation. The case inspector, Andy Rawl, began the investigation by interrogating the last person who was said to have seen Anil Chauhan, Kenneth Reagan. Reagan said that Chauhan had intended to sell his business and tried to make it seem like Chauhan was a shady businessman who had gotten into financial trouble and had no choice but to suddenly disappear without a trace. However, the detectives became suspicious of Reagan's story. So, using new tracking technology, they traced the movements of Reagan's and Chauhan's cell phones on the day of the disappearance. First, Chauhan's phone was tracked in the Hansel area, heading toward the Stonehenge region. On the other hand, Reagan's phone was also tracked from an area near Stonehenge, and at one point, it intersected with Chauhan's phone. Then both of them moved together westward toward Exeter. Exeter is a small, historic city in the southwest of England, and its administrative capital is Devon. So the only clue the police had was that Belinda Brown, the new CEO of SEBA, lives there. So they decided to meet with her, hoping they might learn something more. On the other hand, when Reagan found out the police intended to come to Belinda's house, he got angry and tried to convince Belinda not to let the police into her home. Belinda didn't understand his upset. That same day, Inspector Andy Rawl received a call from one of Reagan's associates. The person on the line claimed to have information about Anil Chauhan. This person was William Hornsey, who had previously been digging with a backhoe in connection with Belinda. William claimed that he had recently spoken with Chauhan and that he was still in Britain, but on the run, and had asked William to bring him a stolen passport. They were near the passport office in an area called Newport in Wales on Easter Sunday. This information was extremely vital because it could lead the police directly to Chauhan. That's why the police contacted Belinda, canceled the meeting with her, and said, "We've come across more important information and probably don't need to come see you at all." After this call, Reagan contacted Belinda to make sure the police had canceled the meeting. Her tone was as if she already knew everything, and she said, "Yeah, I know the police aren't coming because they're going to Wales to arrest Chauhan." That weekend, Belinda, completely unexpectedly, met with Reagan, Hornsey, and Peter Rees. They came to her house again and said they wanted to fix the path next to the stables because it really needed some gravel. Belinda agreed, and she wasn't surprised to see the excavator, thinking to herself that they probably wanted to level the path before laying down the gravel. So she left the house with her child and let them get on with their work. Meanwhile, 2 days later on Easter, the police went to the place where Hornsey had said he was supposed to meet Chauhan and bring him a stolen passport. At the appointed time, Hornsey and Reagan, who had come with him, both stood at the meeting spot for a while, and the police were watching them. Then they pretended as if they had received a phone call. They told the police that an unknown number had called them and said, "We are friends of Anil Chauhan. We know you talked to the police, so the meeting is canceled." When the police traced the call, it only led to an unregistered phone. No new information was obtained. The only thing that became clear was that the police had been misled. So once again, the police went back to their previous lead and called Belinda Brown in for questioning. But before Belinda went to the police station, Reagan told her, "If the police ask what I was doing on the property, tell them I was helping you with the irrigation system." But this seemed strange to Belinda because Reagan had said he would take a look at the irrigation system, but in reality, he hadn't done anything at all. Then at the police station, when Inspector Andy Rawl told Belinda, "I want to have a complete and honest conversation with you. What do you think happened? Doesn't anything seem suspicious to you?" Belinda said, "I've told you everything I know. There's just one thing that seems really strange to me." She recounted her conversation with Reagan that morning. The officers exchanged glances and asked, "So what was he really doing out there?" Belinda replied, "Nothing, just digging a ditch." Detectives then headed to the farm. They believed they were about to make a horrifying discovery at Belinda's farm. They suspected that the Chauhan family had been murdered and buried there. The homicide team spent 5 full days digging up Belinda's field, but the bodies they expected to find never turned up. By April 2003, the police searching for the Chauhan family for over 2 months, but they were looking in the wrong place. In April, a couple boating in the middle of the sea spotted something floating on the water, a large, bloated object. A body. It was the body of Anil Chauhan, his mouth sealed with duct tape and a fatal blow to the back of his head. The coroner said the blow left him semi-conscious, and then he was suffocated, a completely premeditated murder. The coroner also concluded that Anil's body was first buried, then exhumed and taken out to sea to be dumped. In the large pit at Belinda's house, not only Anil but his entire family, his wife, 2 young sons, and his mother-in-law, had been buried for a time. There was even evidence found that confirmed the story. Baby clothing snap buttons, women's jewelry, and even hair that was later identified as belonging to Anil Chauhan. Belinda didn't want to believe that people had been buried on her land for a while. That's why she tried to keep herself busy. When she picked up her horse's special blanket, which had been torn, and got in her car to go get it repaired. On the road, she ran into Reagan and Hornsey. They asked her to get into their car, But Belinda didn't want to, so she made an excuse, showed them the blanket, and said she had borrowed it from a nearby cabin and needed to return it, promising she'd be back soon. They agreed. Then Belinda called the police and they sent officers. But Reagan and Hounsey had already left. They fled to Europe and left their other accomplice, Peter Rees, behind. Peter Rees, who was left alone and under pressure, started to feel guilty. He confessed to someone named Wendy Pauls and said, "I was involved in the murder case of an Asian family. The police can link me to the burial site, but I didn't kill anyone. They can't pin everything on me." Wendy, shocked by this confession, informed the police. 12 days after Reagan and Hounsey escaped, Peter Rees was arrested in a local pub, but he remained silent at the police station. 3 weeks later, a fisherman found another body floating in the water. The body belonged to Nancy, Anil Chauhan's wife. Kenneth Reagan, 2 months on the run, was identified, arrested police in Belgium. Shortly after, William Hounsey turned himself in. Now all 3 main suspects had been arrested, but none of them were willing to say a word. Since there were no witnesses to the murders, the police needed to convict them with solid evidence. In April 2005, the longest criminal trial began. During this 9-month trial, nearly 4,500 different pieces of evidence were presented, from financial transactions to gas receipts, but the core of the case was built around mobile phone tracking data. According to comprehensive data analysis, at one particular point in time, Chauhan was indeed with Reagan, Hounsey, and Peter Rees, and their precise phone tracking led directly to 3 Forge Close. That is, the private residence of Kenneth Reagan, where Chauhan had been held captive for some considerable time. Another important piece of evidence that came into the hands of the police was a Lexmark color printer and a gray suitcase, which had been handed over to the police by Hounsey's son. Inside the suitcase were 10 blank A4 sheets, each bearing Chauhan's signature. This showed how Reagan convinced the company's employees that Anil Chauhan had sold his company and left the country. The extra sheets were there so Reagan could forge more documents if necessary. The police concluded this was why Chauhan had been kept at Reagan's house for a while, to sign the documents. At first, Reagan just wanted to get rid of Anil Chauhan, but once he went down this path, he realized there was no way to kill the entire family, because if he didn't do that, Nancy, Chauhan's wife, would probably go to the police. Cell phone tracking data showed that while Peter Rees was staying with Anil Chauhan, Reagan and Hounsey had gone to see the Chauhan family. They stayed there for a few hours and then killed them. For Reagan, these murders were simply something that had to be done to achieve his goal. For him, killing a family was almost as easy as changing his shirt. The police weren't sure exactly where and when the Chauhan family was killed, but they were certain that Anil Chauhan himself was murdered in Reagan's house. But the problem was that proving it was difficult, and the mobile phone data wasn't enough evidence. The house itself had just been renovated. All the furniture had been replaced with new items. Of course, this was a clear sign that someone had tried to clean up the crime scene, but none of this was admissible in court. But no one knew that the main piece of evidence had been left behind by Anil Chauhan himself. All of Anil's clothes, except for his socks, had already been sent for examination. Socks aren't examined because they don't contain much evidence. However, to make the case thorough, they decided to examine the socks as well. And that's when the dark secret of this case was revealed. Inside Anil Chauhan's sock, a folded piece of paper was found. The paper had been in the sea for a long time, but because it was folded so many times, it had been preserved. That paper was a letter from the investment company Cheltenham and Gloucester to Kenneth Reagan at 3 Forge Close. The letter dated February 13, 2003. the exact day Chauhan taken hostage in Reagan's house. A decisive, shocking piece of evidence. It was as if Chauhan had sent a message from beyond the grave to help solve the case and let the court know who had killed him. In the end, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. Peter Rees was sentenced to 23 years in prison for the murder of Anil Chauhan. And Peter was the one who, out of guilt, confessed that he hadn't killed anyone himself, but he had been involved in the murder of a family. William Hornsey and Kenneth Reagan were each sentenced to 5 life terms in prison. Chauhan's mother-in-law's body was found along the shores of the Isle of Wight. But the body of Anil Chauhan's infant child, 18 months old, and his other child, 8 weeks old, were never found. The murder of any child is truly a tragedy. Usually, when you come across such a crime, you can find some kind of motive behind it. Someone lost control, someone was depressed, someone had a mental disorder. But in this case, the only motive was greed, and that's what made this crime even more horrifying. After the case was solved, Anchor, Nancy's brother, returned to New Zealand. He never saw his nieces and nephews. The only time he saw family together was in a home video he found in Nancy's empty house. Nancy had recorded the video just 2 days before they disappeared. In video, family joyful. The kids were playing in the house. Even their older son walked for the first time in the video. Anil's mother-in-law was happy, and you could hear Anil's laughter. This family was genuinely happy before this crime happened. When we were reading this story with our team members and friends, we realized how greed can lead to unimaginable tragedies. The murder of an entire family, just to take over a company, shows the depth of cruelty in some people, as if they have no trace of humanity. What do you think? Share your thoughts about this true crime story in the comments. But the enduring story of the Chauhan family serves as a powerful reminder that while justice may indeed take considerable time to unfold, ultimately, in the end, it invariably prevails. So, even in the darkest and most challenging moments, unwavering persistence and the steadfast refusal to give up can truly lead to the undeniable truth finally coming to light.